Evergreen fund is best described by what we call a closed blind pool portfolio fund. I'm going to raise a fund. It's going to be maybe $20 million. Once I raise $20 million, I'm going to take that money, deploy it, buy maybe 4, 5, 6 assets. It's going to mature over maybe 10 years at the max. We're going to sell the assets, close up, everybody makes a boatload of money, and we go home.
If you're a residential real estate agent earning $200,000 a year and you want to grow your passive income, this show's for you. Learn the secrets other agents use and hear from experts in our field in order to guide you along your journey to investing in assets like apartment communities so that you can turn your commissions into cash flow. I'm Randall McCleard. Let's go, baby. All right, welcome to the show today. Excited for our new guest today is going to be Adnan Merchant. He is an attorney. He practices securities law, and they have a title company, all kinds of stuff that we're going to get into and talk about today. It is great to have somebody with his knowledge and skills and understanding of funds while we're midway through our series where I'm talking about the fund structures and what fund managers do and all of that stuff. So I'm really excited to have him on today to really get into some of the nitty-gritty of setting up a fund, what it takes, what all is involved. So just a little bit about Adnan. He runs a law firm out of Dallas, Texas, and they're a full-service legal team. So they have a title company. They're a fee attorney. He'll jump into this and talk to you about it. But they can take you from contract to close, essentially, if you're doing a syndication, if you're doing a fund, or if you're just doing a single-family fix and flip and that sort of thing. So wealth of knowledge coming from a family office background and working on that side of things into the real estate fund space. So we dive into the economy. We talk about, changes that he's seeing in offerings right now and how the structures of offerings actually work. So one of the big things that he gets to see are some of the red flags in other offerings. And so he knows from experience what you should look out for if you're looking at an investment. So definitely stay tuned for all of that information. And it's a solid show. Stay tuned to the end because at the end, he actually gets into a visual of how a fund is structured, and it's an org chart, and then how the capitals flow or the cash flows flow. And so definitely stay tuned for that. As a point of a little bit of housekeeping, we're sponsored by Ridgeline Investment Group. That is our investment firm that goes and acquires multifamily properties in the Texas market. And if you're interested in seeing some of the deals that we have and our deal flow and looking at some of the investment opportunities that we have, definitely go check out www.ridgelineig.com. And without further ado, let's jump right in, talk to Adnan. Let's go. Welcome, Adnan, to the show. It's great to have you on today. Thanks for making the time. Looking to our chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's great being here.
Yeah, so let's dive right in. I want to kind of get your background because you and I have had an opportunity to talk on multiple occasions. I've heard you speak and give some presentations, so it's been helpful information for me. But people listening don't know who you are. So, give us a quick background on how you got into, I guess, the security space and your law firm in general.
Absolutely. So I'm a partner at MW Law. We're a Dallas-based law firm, but we do have offices in San Antonio. And our thing is really we're a one-stop shop for real estate investment operators and real estate investment, GPs and developers. And so in the firm, we only do 3 things and we do them very well. The first is just general real estate transactions. So we've got attorneys who can assist you on the purchase and sale agreements. We've got attorneys who will take care of everything A to Z in buying the property. The second thing is what I'm doing specifically and what you have me on for today, which is private securities. So we structure real estate funds, we structure real estate syndications, we handle securities compliance, corporate structuring, that whole gambit. And then third, we are also a title company. So we can also close on all of your different deals. And so really one-stop shop. I got into this thing sort of actually from the perspective of venture capital in terms of private security. So I've got a background. I used to work in fintech. I used to work for a family office doing a lot of venture capital funds and investment deals. So my background really comes from private securities generally, and then moved sort of into real estate afterward and realized that it was an excellent space and was super happy to be here. So just applying private securities to real estate. And voila, we've got, real estate private equity funds and syndications, and that's what we do every day, and we love it.
Awesome. Well, that is a perfect intro and a segue into a question I didn't know I was going to ask you just because I didn't know that was your background in a sense. So one thing that I talk about is the difference in like a real estate fund and a venture capital fund and the return profiles and that sort of thing, that a hedge fund has certain characteristics and, a venture fund has certain characteristics. So Can you speak to the differences in the return profiles that like a venture fund, if that was kind of your background, may be targeting or looking at for a limited partner's sake benefit?
Certainly, yeah. And they are, the structure might be relatively similar and you might sort of identify with it if you see it on paper as being relatively similar, but certainly they're very different profiles, right? Venture capital is about really finding the most opportunistic deals. That means it's very high risk, but potentially also very high reward, right? So your upside in venture deals is going to be sometimes to the tune of 5, 6, 7, 8x your investment. But it's going to be in the longer term, right? It's going to be something that, hey, we're investing in a startup, right? We're investing in these potentially great companies, tech companies or otherwise, that one day hopefully are going to, achieve something. We're going to get a huge return on our money. That necessarily means that in the interim also, for the period of 5 years, 7 years, sometimes 10 years, there's no interim cash flow coming, right? It's an investment that you sort of typically make. You set it, you forget it, and you hope that one day that's going to pay out largely, right? Real estate as a profile is different, right? Depending on what you're investing in with real estate, for example, if they're value add properties that are already operational, in addition to an upside benefit from the eventual sale or the close of that fund, you might be also looking at some interim cash flows. You hear a lot of preferred returns occurring throughout the term of the fund and a bunch of different things, right? And real estate then generally is going to be a little bit less risky than venture capital, right? Because real estate, at least you're investing in some sort of tangible touch and feel asset, real estate, which definitely does tend to appreciate year over year, regardless of what's happening in market conditions, right? So, it's opportunistic versus maybe sometimes more stable assets. And so the profile of the investment is very different if you're a partner, right? A lot of our limited partners, they will diversify. They'll invest in some venture capital, but then they'll invest in some real estate because, again, different profiles, right?
Yeah. So like risk allocation and how you handle that, I guess, on your own end. So you were working for a family office, and were you part of that discussion? Like, how much should we have in real estate compared to venture, or was it at all venture that family office was?
Absolutely, right. Part of the discussion was that risk profile, right? How much are we going to allocate to venture investments, to high risk, high reward investments? How much are we going to invest in real estate funds? And again, even within real estate, you have opportunistic funds, right, that are about ground up developments, building something new, right, versus more stable assets that are generating a more consistent cash flow. So certainly, I think everybody has to evaluate a risk profile to build a diverse, set of investments that you might make for yourself.
Yeah, great. Well, that's interesting. So glad we touched on that. I want to jump back. You were talking about title company side of things. Do you guys focus mainly on commercial, residential, or is it just the gamut you run?
We actually have both. Yeah, we have our company. We're a fee office for Alamo Title, which is Fidelity National here in Texas, right? So we have both. We have a robust residential division, and they're closing upwards of, 300 to 400 closings a year on the residential side. So they focus a little bit primarily on higher valued residential properties, but we do all of it. Our focus, though, as attorneys on this side really is the commercial department. So our commercial title department is very, very robust, right? We do a lot of commercial closings on all types of real estate, whether it's land, multifamily, industrial, large or small. We really do focus and kind of develop business on the commercial side for sure.
Yeah, I want to come back to that maybe after a little bit, just because I used to be an escrow officer as well, and just seeing
oh, no kidding.
Yeah, it's an interesting side of the puzzle to be on, I guess, because you're seeing deal flow. Like you see what's actually closing and what's falling out, and you see the terms of the deals and everything. So it's a great way to have line of sight on what's happening.
Yeah, no, the market is certainly in an interesting time right now, right? I mean, you've got indicators kind of going in both ways, right? You've got the Fed still raising interest rates, anticipating still a further contraction of the economy. But then at the same time, they're raising rates less than they were anticipated to raise rates. The market in general looks to be doing a little bit healthier. Unemployment didn't fall to the levels that they were anticipating. So it's a little bit difficult right now. Everybody's glass crystal ball is like a little bit off right now. We don't know where things are going. What I can tell you is so far what's been happening for the last few quarters, right? You have seen a constriction in deal flow, right? We have unfortunately seen a number of deals that do fall apart, and for a variety of reasons. Sometimes and chiefly, it's the financing just doesn't make sense. With interest rates rising the way they are, a lot of our clients that are syndicators, that are fund managers, they can't close on some of these assets because the lender financing numbers just don't make sense. They're too constricted, so they're resulting in lower returns for investors. And so sometimes the deal just doesn't make sense, right? But there are a number of deals that are still happening, and I think it's about being creative in the market. So some of our clients that are able to get deals, what we're seeing is sort of the rise of the gap fillers, if you will, right? So preferred equity is stepping up and coming in, bridge financing, mezzanine financing, other creative ways to still bring financing and capital to close a deal are still happening out there, right? I'll give you an example. We had a deal, it was a Class A multifamily deal, and it was a fairly large deal. It was above $80 million. And about 3 to 4 weeks before closing, the lender reduced lender proceeds because, again, the numbers don't make sense. So the lender couldn't lend at the same numbers. And so all of a sudden for us and for our clients, that resulted in a gap in the equity stack. We needed to bring more money to close. And we're only about 2 to 3 weeks away from closing on this asset, which again was a substantial purchase price already. So, to get creative, we had to do a number of things. One, we did have to go and find a pref equity partner. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, pref equity partners are just basically these large capital funds that basically give you debt, but it's not structured as debt. They're going to give you some additional money. It's going to be paid out before everybody else. And the terms are very similar to debt, like an 8% or a 10% sort of interest rate, but they're going to call it a preferred return. And then they're not going to share in the upside, whatever that might be, but they are going to get paid first. So similar to debt, it kind of sits right on top of the debt and before the equity. We had to go get one of those partners for the deal. And then secondly, we had to go back to the seller and we had to renegotiate purchase price because, hey, the market is what it is. This is a very substantial asset and there aren't other people lined up to buy this right now. So either we close this deal or we don't. And it's not in everyone's best interest not to. So thankfully, we made that deal work and many similar to it just by being creative in the market today, right? But I think overall, and to kind of sum that up, we are seeing constrictions in the market. Conversely, though, and sort of the topic of what you wanted to talk to me about, while deal by deal syndications are constricting, we are seeing an increase in the number of funds that are being structured. And, whether people are right or wrong, but they're all predicting that in the future, a lot of these assets are going to be on sale. And so we want to have a fund ready to go that has locked up capital commitments that we can deploy and purchase a lot of these assets that might have otherwise been unaffordable before, right? So again, a wild time in the market, maybe an uncertain time in the market, but for those who are paying attention, there's a lot of opportunity to be had.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I want to go back to the pref equity side of things, just this is kind of me nerding out on this a little bit, but are you seeing when they come in, are they demanding some sort of governance or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So even though they're a small part of the capital stack, they're able to come in and say, these are the controls we need to put in place.
Absolutely, right. So pref equity, I don't want to say standard, right? But there is a bit of a standard for pref equity partners and what they like to see if they're going to come into a deal. Number one, they are, rates right now. What are pref equity rates that they're largely requesting right now? It's pretty high. It's between 8, sometimes up to 12%. If you're lucky, you can negotiate that to say maybe a portion of that is going to be a current pay and the rest of it's deferred. So maybe we're only paying 5% currently, but the rest of it can get deferred to later. But the second thing with respect to governance is absolutely the way they want to structure the deal is they're going to want effectively a joint venture between your syndication or your fund and them with regard to the ownership and purchase of the asset. So now there's going to be this other entity in the middle, which is a joint venture vehicle that both the fund and the pref equity partner own in whatever percentages. And then that JV vehicle gives the pref equity partner significant control rights, right? While they might not run the day-to-day, so the day-to-day is still within the discretion of our clients, they will have fundamental consent rights. So selling the property, refinancing the property, settling major lawsuits, a lot of the fundamental decisions that we might think of as being sort of on that fundamental level, they're going to retain consent rights on it.
Yeah, good to know. So again, I want to go back to, I guess, the market. So you're seeing that as that's coming in, filling the gap. But what else is transacting right now? Are you seeing the transaction volume drop off significantly, or do you see it's kind of leveling out? And what is actually transacting? Is it Class A, Class B, Class C? Is it industrial? Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah.
Kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's happening right now is we did see, I don't want to call it a significant, but we have seen a pretty good sizable decrease in deal volume. Part of that is also, it is January, and just historically, real estate tends to be a little bit slow in the first quarter, right? Especially coming off a very busy sort of fourth quarter, and fourth quarter was fairly busy. I will say that we saw a slowdown in fourth quarter of 2022 as well, but still it was fairly busy. There were still deals closing. A lot of our clients still got a lot of deals through. I think we're going to start seeing a tapering off though, if I'm going to be honest. I think what's being impacted the most are sort of your Class C's, Class B's, sort of the lower end type assets that do require value add. And the reason for that is because the CapEx, right? So when you purchase a value add property, you're not just buying the property, you need to raise additional capital such that you can put it into the property and greatly improve it and add value, right? So that extra capital that's required on those type of level deals is what is more difficult to kind of source these days.
Okay. So
Class A properties,
Sorry. I was just going to, so it's like the limited partner side coming in, raising the actual equity. It's coupled with the fact that lenders are reducing their loan to cost or loan to value proceeds. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. You were talking
No,
about...
yeah, you're perfectly good. I mean, it's just difficult in the market to kind of see where it's headed, right? But based on where we kind of are now, I'm still pretty hopeful. I think there's still a lot of opportunity, in the way that these down markets tend to sometimes go is, there's usually a pretty good curve, and we can start to see that as we get into it.
Yeah, I was listening to a report the other day, and I don't know, I was looking at a bunch of different projections for like single family house prices, increase, decrease, like predictions that people have for the coming year. I think realtor.com or NAR had the highest, most bullish approach. They were 5% growth this year, all the way down to somebody who was like negative 20%, like is what we're going to see. So you're in Dallas, right? I mean, have you guys seen the single family home prices slow or drop?
Yeah, they have. Even single family starting to drop. I think the cool thing about being in Texas, though, and especially some of these larger cities, we are a little bit more resilient. Our real estate market tends to not be as immediately impacted, but also recover a little bit faster and a little bit better. It's just the way that things are in these markets, which are a bit more affordable. Cost of living is affordable. Things are generally more affordable. But yeah, even right now, I will say that in Dallas, the housing market has also started to drop. Not as much compared to the national average, but certainly there's been a drop.
Yeah, I would say that affordability is key this year in 24 with the increased interest rates, along with the increased home prices. I was looking at a chart and it showed the gap between, or the spread between what residential rental, like apartments, and actual single family rentals compared to a mortgage rate. That's the biggest it's ever been. So I think for, the rental side of things, it's driving tenants to stay tenants longer just because it's hard and it's not as affordable. So on the single family side, if you're looking to buy, then obviously you're trying to find affordable markets, and that's shrinking, the number of affordable markets. So.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's totally true.
Yeah. So, all right, great. So covered some market stuff. And that's the title side. Again, you guys are doing both commercial and residential. So on the contract side as well, you guys basically are a turnkey. I say, hey, I found a property. We're going to buy it. I want to do it in a fund. You're going to do all my securities offering docs. You're going to do the corporate structure setup, close it there. Like I can just show up and you'll hold my hand through the whole process. Okay. All right. So let's talk hypothetical fund then. We've talked about this in the past, so it's not so hypothetical, but I'm looking at starting a fund, and let's say that it's going to be an evergreen fund. Can you kind of explain what that is? Can you explain some of the pros and cons of an evergreen fund? And the whole idea, let's say, is we have a lot of agents listening. There's not a retirement plan for agents per se, right? We all have to go out and source our own sort of retirement. Some brokers offer it, but for the most part, agents in general do not have a retirement plan. So the idea is, let's set up a fund that goes and acquires assets in different markets that are performing well and have it really realtor centric. Evergreen funds, so they can come in and out. They have direct reinvestment. So anyway, can we talk high level about some of this stuff, and maybe you can break it down so that people listening can understand, what I was just. Yeah,
absolutely. Excuse me, absolutely right. Funds. I'm real nerdy about this stuff. I love talking about it, which is why I'm always happy to get invited and speak about these kinds of things. It really is a lot of fun for me, which I think a lot of people can't relate to, but I think you're one of them. So
let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, so, an evergreen fund is best described by first making sure that we describe sort of its counterpart, right? Which is what most people think of when they think of a fund. And that is what we call a closed blind pool portfolio fund, right? I'm going to raise a fund. It's going to be maybe $20 million. Once I raise $20 million, that's it. I'm going to take that money, deploy it, buy maybe 4, 5, 6 assets. It's going to mature over a course of maybe 5 years, 7 years, 10 years at the max. And then that's it. We're going to sell the assets, close up, everybody makes a boatload of money, and we go home, right? It's closed, meaning, it's a $20 million thing. That's it. It's blind pool because the investors are blind to the assets that the fund is acquiring. You, as the general manager of the fund, are making all of those decisions. And lastly, it's a portfolio fund because that's exactly what we mean. It's going to have a portfolio of 4, 5, 6 different assets. So a closed blind pool portfolio fund. So an evergreen fund, by contrast, is not going to be closed, meaning it's going to be perpetually open and forever in existence and continuously raising money. People are coming in, people are coming out, those kinds of things. It is still going to be blind pool because, of course, again, in any fund situation, the manager will still retain the right to source those assets and identify the assets, but it is going to be open-ended in terms of the amount that it's raising. It's open-ended in terms of how long the life of the fund is and that it's perpetual, right? So that's really the difference, right? And fun fact, right? Evergreen, the term itself, it comes from the evergreen trees, right? Which are just perpetually living in existence and stuff like that, right? So yeah, I told you, real nerdy about this, right? So, but one of the key things to keep in mind is still the other end of the coin, right? So the structure of the fund is one thing, but the underlying business of the fund is a whole other thing, right? What is the business you're going to be in? Are you acquiring assets, or are you providing debt instruments, or kind of those kinds of things, right? What level you're investing into, what asset class are you investing into? Those are still defined kind of on both sides, and you have to really think about how you want to structure it and for what purpose, right?
Yeah, to acquire assets. And I have heard of guys recently going and setting up a fund that does both. They have the flexibility to offer debt as part or portion of their fund, and then they are also investing in assets to acquire them and run them. So is that something that is realistic, or do you see that typically split out?
Yeah, it's tricky. And here's why, right? It could be done, and there are certainly, we've got clients too that have done it that way, but it is tricky because the evergreen fund, the best business model that really works for it is the income model, right? Where really the fund is more of a lender, right? And it's raising capital to provide debt instruments to a bunch of different people, earn sort of a fixed interest income, then turn around and pay that income directly to its investors, right? Sort of like a Charles Schwab account. You put 100 grand into this thing, all you're getting in an income fund is a relatively higher preferred return, but no upside split, right? Because it's evergreen, it means I can come in and come out sort of when I want, of course, subject to what we call lockup periods, which are sort of commitment terms in an evergreen, right? So it's not to say that I can come in today and leave tomorrow. Still, in an evergreen fund, there's usually going to be a 12-month or a 24-month lockup period where once I'm in, I need to be committed for at least that long. But after that period of time, I can take my money and go. So because of that, the evergreen model really mostly lends itself to that income side, which means that I'm getting maybe an 8 or a 10% pref annually while I'm in the fund, and that's it. There's no upside profit share or profit split coming to me. Then the day that I want to leave, that's the day I get my principal and I go home, right? And that works well because the counter to that is, acquiring assets. You consistently have to be working to strike value, right? What is the actual valuation of the assets in the fund? Because purely from an administrative and accounting standpoint, if you've got investors perpetually coming in and out, we have to be very cognizant of what the value of the fund is when those investors are coming and when those investors are leaving, right? So the asset side mixed with the sort of income piece can be a little bit tricky for that. How do you value all of those things consistently, right? How do you keep an accurate value for it? So
we're proud to be sponsored by Ridgeline Investment Group. Ridgeline has a track record of transacting more than $53 million in assets throughout Texas. Ridgeline is currently looking to acquire 100 to 200 unit Class B multifamily communities between 5 and 20 million in San Antonio, Temple, Waco, Tyler, and other Texas secondary markets. To learn more about Ridgeline Investment Group, visit www.ridgelineig.com. Do you see that NAV struck once a year, like asset value, NAV, either an income fund or just in general for a fund, right? Typically you do it once a year and you get a price for the assets that you have. But so on an income fund, that's something that is once a year enough, or you would have to do it every time you have a bulk of investors come in and out?
So that's the beauty of it, right? The income model, we're not really worried about NAV as much because there's not really a hard asset. The asset is sort of the promissory note. It's the receivables under the note, right? And so those are going to be what they're going to be. If I'm supposed to make 8% interest, on a 100 grand note, that's, I know what that is. I know exactly the number, which is why it makes it easier for evergreen funds, right? So, I'd say about 90% of evergreen funds are going to be those kind of debt, what we call income funds. And then most of your asset looking funds are going to be those closed portfolio funds. And by the way, that's not to suggest that you can't scale on the closed fund, right? Most of our clients that do that, the way they scale that is fund one, then fund two, then fund three, and so on and so forth, consistently just raising more money as it needs, right? So, today you might be in the middle of fund three. So if someone wants to invest today, they're investing in fund three, right? 2 years from now, they're investing in fund four, right? Or whatever. So the scalability does exist on both sides. But with the Evergreen model, again, it's not to say that you can't, right? It's not to say that you can't do the asset purchasing type portfolio fund with an Evergreen model. It's just a little bit more tricky on the admin side.
Yeah, I absolutely have seen that done. And I wonder, let's say I'm going out and I'm acquiring the assets and running them with an Evergreen fund that is 10% per F or something like that, right? So the net asset value doesn't really matter, is what you're saying? Or
on the debt instruments, right? But if you've acquired a property, yeah, that's different. You need to strike NAV anytime you've got an actual property in the fund, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. So each year, if it were like an LLC fund, then it would be repricing the share price type thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that becomes the tricky part about just consistently staying on that, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. We went down that rabbit hole a little bit. Hopefully everybody followed that. That was good. Thanks for going down. So I want to go into, and I guess just real fast, do you mainly focus on the drafting side of the docs, or do you actually have clients as well who are saying, hey, Adnan, I'm looking at this investment. Can you review this PPM for me? Do you sit on both sides of that, or do you stick on one side?
No, we can certainly do both. So we've got, by definition of what we do, almost all of our clients are either GPs or LPs, or usually both, right? In some cases, they're the GP. In some cases, they're an LP in somebody else's deal. So we're always happy to just review, from the perspective of an LP, we're happy to review somebody's docs and be like, hey, watch out for this or watch out for that, or have you considered this, right? So yeah, certainly.
So, all right, to that point, then what are some major red flags that limited partners should look out for in the offering docs?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? The first and foremost, and probably the most glaring, is, are we making sure that these, the deal that you're investing in, they've properly complied with securities laws, right? And the way to tell that is the document should be very clear about a couple of things. The first is, what exemption are they using under the Securities Act, right? And most of the time that's going to be Regulation D, right? Without getting super detailed about that, just is there a valid exemption that keeps it a private placement? So Regulation D gives us, the common 506B and the 506C, right? So are the exemptions properly listed? Are they conducting this offering in reliance of one of those two, right? The second piece with securities is, are they exempt under the Investment Company Act, which in real estate, they should be under what we call 3C5 most of the time, right? Sometimes 3C1. So, are those exemptions properly listed? And what that tells you, it's not so much about the fact that they've done those things. What it tells you is they've got competent counsel putting the deal together, right? They've got people who have looked at this, made sure that they are compliant with all the necessary securities, laws and stuff that they need to get into it, right? The next thing then beyond securities compliance, I would say is, pay attention to the deal terms, right? Have those been structured relatively close to what we would consider good for this deal, right? So for example, fees that are higher than average, maybe going to these, the general partners. And if we're taking those fees, then, what does our waterfall look like? Are we still, in a position to where, we're still taking it as a preferred return before the general partner sees their promote or other things like that? Governance rights, right? I mean, at a minimum, and we know that in funds and in securities, a limited partner is not really going to have a lot of participation rights. But at a minimum, there should be carve-outs for bad actor, right? So if the general partner commits fraud or general partner, does something, majority of the investors should have a mechanism to be able to then, replace the general partner, right? So, so those are some of the things that you probably want to be looking at when you're looking at investing into a deal. Is it structured properly? Are the laws there? Do the deal terms, add up and make sense? Have they disclosed enough about the project and specific thesis? And, do we have some level of, control in the event of things going really wrong, right?
Yeah, all valid points. One or two, I don't know if I want to go down that road and talk about, what you see went wrong with like FTX and all that stuff. I don't know if that's a conversation we're going to get into.
That's a whole different ballgame.
I know. All right, we'll leave that. So the red flags we've got, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that's a pretty simple scenario of it appears until all this is tried out. So true to form as an attorney answering the question, it appears that fraud was seriously committed, right? They were certainly doing things that they were not permitted to do. They were not disclosing those things to investors, right? Which, by the way, that's one of the things we have a conversation with all of our clients, right? It is always better to over disclose, right? Hey, are you also, is your affiliate company the property manager for this deal? In many cases, that's okay. It adds value. Hey, you have direct control over property management and you're acting in the best interests of the deal. So that's a good thing, right? And it's okay then that we're paying your affiliate company to be your property manager. But, we've made sure that we've defined those parameters so that it's not a conflict of interest. B, we've disclosed that relationship. We've disclosed that to investors. Investors are aware that that relationship exists, right? They're aware that it is an affiliate situation. And so, those are the kinds of things that you want to be doing as well. But yeah, in FTX's case, man, that's just a whole we just kind of did what we wanted. And then, here we are, right?
Magic money. I'm going to lend it to myself.
Right.
And,
Exactly. Right.
We talked. Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations. I was in a group with a bunch of fund managers, and that was one obvious topic that we talked about quite a bit. So on the flip side, we were talking about some of the economic conditions, right? And what's kind of happening in the market right now. So on the offering side, have you seen offerings themselves, deal terms change with, a tightening economic condition, like environment that we're in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so, the first and foremost hit that they get that takes is going to be the general partner returns, right? So the good general partners are starting with, by reducing their return, metrics, but that's not always, in most cases, that's not really enough, right? You will still see a reduction in preferred return rates. You might still see a reduction in overall IRR or equity multiple projections, right? And one of the things that I would urge all of your listeners in this regard is sometimes that's okay, right? You can't be looking at a deal in 2023 with 2021 glasses. It's certainly not the same, right? But what I would encourage you to do is still take a look at it in context of the time that we're in today. And is it still a good deal for today, right? I mean, don't forget that in most cases, a lot of people just have cash, especially in these kinds of down markets. People hold on to cash, which is accruing less than 1% in most savings accounts, right? So if a deal in 2021 may have given you a 25% IRR, but that same type of deal now is giving you like a 19% IRR, well, it doesn't mean that it's a bad deal, right? It is taking into account economic conditions of where we are today, right? But to kind of answer the original question, yeah, absolutely. The deal terms that we're seeing in offering docs are lower than we've seen before, right? Some people argue that, this is now more of a return to normalcy and regular in 2021 and, was sort of just a cowboy year. I think history will tell us the right answer to that, but certainly it's a different time in the market. So we're seeing different return mechanisms.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if you listened to Jason Hartman. You've ever heard that guy, his name before, but he's got his, like tried and true saying is compared to what? And so it's kind of the same, like you cannot compare 2023 returns to 21, like you said. It's just not realistic. And sitting on the sidelines, having your money sitting in a bank account that is still subject to loss through inflation. Yeah. Not a good spot.
Yeah. You got to keep in mind where inflation is today, right? So
yeah. So as a firm, like what are you guys doing to, overcome any of the challenges in the market? Or are you guys seeing anything? You're like, yeah, we're rocking and rolling. We're killing it. What is it?
I will say, thankfully, as a firm, we're still doing very well. In large part of that is not just existing clients doing more and more deals, which again have constricted, but we really have been growing a lot because I think the space in general has been growing a lot. And so we've been getting a lot of new clients just over the last couple of quarters alone, an uptick from the same period of time, maybe a year ago, we're getting significantly more clients. We are having to get creative for these clients, right? And I think that's something that clients appreciate. In the example I gave earlier about that deal, we really went to bat for those guys, right? We really went back to seller, renegotiated terms. And so what a lot of those things have taught us to do now is make sure, because again, we have attorneys that are transactional attorneys as well, who are assisting on the PSA and the purchase agreement long before we bring it to a securities side, right? So in the PSA, we're trying to add and negotiate for more things, right? Longer financial contingency terms, right? So if we can't get the financing we were hoping for, we should be able to pull out with our earnest money or whatever, right? Now, of course, all of that's always going to be negotiable between the buyer and the seller, but we're really trying to put more of those things in commercial contracts now, right? Just given what we know is going to take place, right? We're certainly building in more due diligence periods or more title and more time to close, right? Because These days, it just takes more time to not just source the proper financing, but also negotiate it and close on it, right? So a lot of different things are certainly having to change in the way that we typically would have done business. It's not as lightning fast. We have to build in some outs. We have to be creative about it, but we're doing it. And I think clients really appreciate that because it saved them on a number of different deals in which, sometimes the deal just didn't work out and it didn't work out. But look, we were able to walk away. We were able to return earnest money and still live to fight another day, if you will, right?
Yeah, that's solid. I think is one of the benefits of having just like a vertically integrated group like yours in order to see all sides of it and actually have some say, I guess, on the actual PSA side before it even gets to you. So to that point, when you're talking to operators, then are you going through and looking at some of their marketing materials as well? And are you guys making sure that's all in compliance and communications and that sort of thing? So it's not just like, hey, here's your doc.
Oh, yeah. No, not at all. So our package on the security side is going to include a couple of things. First, it is going to include all the corporate structuring that you need. So that means we're going to form all of the entities for you. We're going to draft all the governing documents for those entities and however many entities that are, right? So if there's a general partner manager entity, if there's a separate sponsor entity, the fund entity, sometimes we need an SPE, right? A special purpose entity underneath it. Sometimes we need a JV. So all of the entity formations and the governing docs is part of it. The second piece is, of course, all the offering documents, right? So that is the PPM, the subscription agreement, the suitability questionnaires, all of that we're going to do. Then we are going to lastly handle all of your securities compliance. And that does include everything from looking at your pitch deck and offering memorandum, making sure you've got proper disclaimers in there that do comply with securities laws. If you've got a website or social media posts that you're looking to do because it's a 506c offering, we're going to take a look at those for you as well. Make sure you've got proper disclaimers, aren't accidentally tripping up any securities laws. And then, of course, most importantly, we're going to handle all those securities filings too, right? Filing your Form D with the SEC, filing all those state blue sky notices that are required in various states. All of that happens for us in a single package. And our packages on the security side are all going to be flat fee as well. So we're going to, take a look at your deal, take a look at your fund or your terms, and I'm going to quote you a flat fee to do that entire scope, A to Z.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Really solid. So yeah, I don't know. We've covered quite a bit. Anything I should have asked you that I haven't?
I think you've done a really good job of covering this. I think that, there's a lot of good information that we've been able to get into today and stuff like that, right? But, I am a nerd about it, so I'm always happy to chat more.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like getting into the nitty gritty, like talking blue sky laws and all of those things. I think that's maybe, we could, that stuff, but
we could do another podcast.
I get where you're going. But I mean, to me, I nerd out on it as well, like the finance side of it and actually the fund management side of it and the business structure and just running it. I know you and I were talking about you have kind of a model fund structure, and maybe it'd be beneficial for anyone watching the YouTube channel to actually see. So if you want to pull that up, maybe we can run through that real fast just to give a high level
sure,
example of it. And then we can.
Yeah, not a problem. So what I've got up on the screen is just, a pretty standard organizational chart for a real estate private equity fund, for really a closed fund, but, relatively similar for an evergreen fund, right? It's all usually about the same stuff, right? We're really big believers in visualization. So the first deliverable any client ever gets from us in securities is going to be your own org chart, right? We're going to draw this thing out for you. We're going to really show how all the arrows and all the pieces fit together. We want to make sure that you have a firm understanding of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. Why? You're going to get the exact same type of questions from your investors, right? So it's best that you're able to really answer these questions and really understand the complexities that go into something like this, right? So the chart that I've got up on the screen, again, is just a pretty standard type of fund. And, right in the middle of it, the big entity that you see, that's the fund entity, if you will. It's oftentimes an LLC, sometimes it's an LP, right? And that entity is going to be comprised on the one hand of all of your investors, or sometimes we refer to them as limited partners, right? Nomenclature notwithstanding, they're your investors or the people that are buying the actual equity of the fund in exchange for that investment. So they're going to own a piece of this fund in exchange for what they've invested, right? On the other side of the fund, you've got the general partner or the manager, right? And they're essentially the fiduciary for this fund. They're responsible for managing the fund, running the fund, determining its opportunities, doing a number of things in running the whole project, if you will, right? That's going to be comprised of whoever it is that's a sponsor on the deal and those kinds of things, right? In a nutshell, really, that's what a fund is, right? You've got some limited partners, you've got some general partners. They come together into this entity, they capitalize the entity, and boom, now we've got a pool of investment capital, aka a fund. So what is the fund going to do with it then? It's going to go and look for a bunch of different assets that it can buy or acquire, or notes that it can perform, or, debt that it can give out, whatever it's going to do. And when it does that, typically in a fund, what it's going to do first is kind of put in place this intermediate entity, which is sometimes called an SPV or an SPE, just stands for special purpose vehicle or special purpose or single purpose entity. It's just an LLC, which is a subsidiary of the fund. So in most cases, it's wholly owned by the fund as a direct pass-through subsidiary. And then that LLC is going to drop down and actually be the one to purchase that particular asset. And the reason we do this, especially in a fund that's going to have a portfolio of assets, is so that each asset is not owned directly by the fund, but rather by this intermediate SPV. And what that helps do is it helps silo the liability. So for example, if there's a slip and fall or something bad happens on one of your properties, it doesn't affect the other property because the owner of that first property is this SPV, right? Not its sister SPV that owns a different property, right? So for liability purposes, you're kind of siloing your assets, all still directly owned by the fund and then thereby indirectly owned by the investors, right? So your investors still have that stake in all of the assets of the fund. It's just by way of a bit of corporate structuring that we put into place that helps really, shield liability and do a couple of other things when it comes to how we want to organize the assets, right? So yeah, in a nutshell, it's a pretty simple approach. Obviously, it can be a little bit more complex than what I've got on the screen. There could be a number of other things going on and a number of different ways we might structure these things. But, top down, it's a pretty standard structure.
Can you explain for anyone that is looking at it? So on the left side of the chart, you have the manager LLC, and then on the right side, you have GP LLC. So can you explain to people the difference in those and why they're two separate things?
Absolutely. So this is going to be one of those things where, as the general partner or the sponsor, there's really two things that play for you here, right? This is really the easiest way to describe it. There are obviously other reasons for it, but the easiest way to describe this is, you're doing two things as a sponsor. One, you're running the fund, and what you're doing with that is you're getting management fees, presumably, right? So the manager entity on this side, or sometimes the investment manager, it's what we call a non-member manager. It doesn't actually own equity in the fund. It is a third party, if you will, who's responsible for managing the fund and is thereby getting paid all those management fees, right? Which in most cases is ordinary income, right? So the manager is getting these fees, it's running the show, it's the fiduciary, it's responsible party, all of those things. But separate from that, you as the sponsors, in most cases, are also likely going to be getting something called a promote, or a carried interest, or a profit share in line with the other investors, right? Sometimes it's often an 80-20 split of all the profits or something like that, right? Well, what you want to do is you want those profits going to a different entity, or without the entity, at least just going directly to the sponsors as a separate class of equity owners, right? And you want to be doing that because we're separating assets from liabilities, right? On the left side of the chart, that manager entity, it's the fiduciary, which means it's where all of your liability is as a general partner or as a sponsor, right? That's where, your fiduciary responsibilities are housed. That is the entity responsible for doing things. So if things go wrong, that's the entity that's really liable. On the right side of the chart, then, the GP entity that we form, which is just really for the sponsors to hold that asset instead, which is that carried interest, that promote, or that profit share. And so we separate the two, so you're protecting assets from your liabilities.
Awesome. So this is a great visual. If you are listening, I suggest you go to the YouTube channel, check it out, and see what we're talking about here. So I know you're not an accountant, and maybe we should have some disclosures in here anyway, but on this type of deal, I'm an investor and I invested in this thing, and I'm in the fund, and we sell SPV 1, we sell asset number 1. Again, you're not an accountant, but what is the flow of the capital in that situation? Am I getting paid out straight away, or is that, oh, look at this, what? Yeah. We got more charts.
Yeah, it's the perfect answer to that question, right? So yeah, no, it's a great question, right? So what's the cash flow situation from bottom up then, right? How does this typically kind of work, right? So first of all, total disclaimer, I am definitely not a CPA. Please definitely speak with I wouldn't be a lawyer if I didn't at least throw that in, right? Please, get financial consult from, the relevant parties here. But generally speaking, it is fairly straightforward, right? So the asset is going to generate, revenue. The revenue comes into the SPV. The SPV might have some expenses it has to pay. So services or whatever it's got to pay, expenses are going to go out. From there, what's left is the SPV's profits, which are going to flow directly up to the fund. Then the fund is going to have expenses, which again include those management fees and all other expenses the fund has to deal with, right? And then from there, what's left, what is our profit, that's going to go to both the investor members and the sponsor members as, the profit split. Now, what that split is, how that split functions, that's all governed by something we call the waterfall, right? Which is really just the distribution mechanics, right? So what the waterfall is going to tell you is if I've got $100 of profit left after all my expenses, how am I splitting this $100 amongst all of the investors and the sponsors? Is it first 100% goes all to the investors till they get their money back? Then second, whatever's left after that becomes an 80-20 split, or, all the way to some super complicated waterfalls that have like 10 different steps in them, right? And it's called a waterfall because the way you should really think about this is like, buckets underneath a waterfall, right? The first bucket has to get filled up. Then that bucket's going to overflow into the second bucket. Second bucket's going to fill up. Then it overflows into the third bucket, and so on and so forth, right? So that's the way visually to kind of think about a waterfall. And so that's what governs this final profit split up here between all of these parties.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Yeah, waterfall hurdles. I mean, you'll see a bunch of different things on different offerings. And so, yeah, you need to key in on that when you're reading through the offering docs to see how the money is going to flow, obviously. And like Adnan said, consult with your CPA and an attorney so that you are actually getting the right advice. Even if you've looked at a lot of PPMs, you still want to probably have somebody look at it. So this is great. It's a solid visual there. My engineering brain keys into these things immediately because when I was first setting up funds and doing this, I built this out myself and showed it to a couple guys, and they're like, "Oh wow, you're a nerd." I was like, "Yeah, it's
right.
I need this." So it just helps.
No, absolutely right.
So
I mean, visualizations are key a lot of times when you're doing this, right? Which again is why that's the first deliverable any of our clients ever get from us, right? We're going to build you your own org chart here so you can see what you're looking to do and how that's going to work. Yeah,
for sure. All right. Well, you can go ahead and pull this off and we'll kind of wrap up. Solid information. Every time I start talking about this stuff, I learn something and then I still like to geek out on it. So let me ask you some questions about stuff not related to real estate then or funds. So what's your favorite pastime not related to business?
I love science fiction. So I love watching like sci-fi movies and TV shows, and I love reading sci-fi books. Aside from that, my wife and I love to go on hikes with our dog. So that's generally my mix. And if I'm lucky, I'm going to bring a sci-fi book with me on the hike. So just like still read it.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, I'm all about that.
I got to confess, I have not been into sci-fi. In a sense I have, but I just picked up and I'm on the second book. We Are Bob. Have you read that?
Oh yeah, no, I've heard of it, but I have not read that one.
Oh
no.
Man, it sucked me in. So I've been going through that like feverishly. I was like, okay, I got to start reading sci-fi. All right. So the second thing, what's the best thing or memory that's happened to you or the family in the last 60, 90 days?
What's the best thing that happened to me? Well, actually, funnily enough, my wife and I are expecting our first child. And so that's definitely the most interesting and exciting thing coming up. Absolutely. Yeah. Super excited.
Is that public or am I like, you heard it here first sort of deal?
It is. Yeah, it is as of about a week ago, which is why I'm super happy to be able to share it on a recorded podcast without my wife getting super angry with me.
Congrats. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, no, thank you. I've been waiting to share that with people. So, it's one of those things, right? As most people will tell you, right? You want to just wait a little bit of time. A lot of things can still happen early in the pregnancy and stuff like that. And my wife is an OBGYN. So she's very intimately familiar with how this process works. And so, I've just been waiting. I've been excited. I've been waiting. I want to share it with everybody, but we've been patient. And thankfully, we're at that stage where we are, sharing the news with a lot of people. And so it feels really good to be able to say that.
Number one, first one?
First one, yeah.
Oh, wow. Congrats. Yeah, it's a life changer. I remember my brother had his son before we did. And he kept telling me, your life's not your own anymore. Your life's not your own. I was like, what does that mean? It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
And it happened, but it's incredible. I look over at my son. He's 5 years old. I was just looking at him the other day and I was like, man, I cannot believe you've been in this world for 5 years. Like what has gone,
Yeah.
So Congrats. Very cool.
Thank
time.
you. Yeah.
And
yeah,
then
for sure.
Let's wrap up. Maybe give a shout out. Name one or two people that have been most influential to you or your success.
Most influential to me. Okay, so the first for me is definitely, and I know this might sound cliche, but definitely my father, right? So my father was a big time real estate investor. He did a lot of like truck stops up and down, all the way from Texas up to, Kansas, Missouri, this and that. He taught me a lot of fundamentals when it comes to just business in general, right? And of course, establishing my own firm is in part being a lawyer, but in part also being a businessman, right? It's about being able to do those kinds of things. And, till today, I'm still like picking up the phone. I'm like, Dad, what the hell am I supposed to do with this problem or this situation, right? So number one, I would not be where I am in terms of like our success that we've had without that. Second person, let's see if I can think about this a little bit more broadly than immediately. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult for me to think about like kind of celebrity figures or anything like that I've really like keyed into. I really like, okay, here's one that might be a little bit of an interesting one. I really like Malcolm Gladwell. I love reading his books. And it's not so much that's been like, business wise, but just, I've learned a lot from his books on economics, right? I think what's awesome to me or what's crazy to me is that like economists, right, when they kind of apply their thinking to like anthropology or like societal things, or, if you've read a lot of his books, David and Goliath, or, those kinds of books, you really learn about a lot about human nature. You learn a lot about just societal stuff. You learn about how, we function in society, values, this and that. It's really interesting to me, especially because you can put kind of an economic spin to it, right? And so you really learn a lot of things that go into there. So yeah, I'd say that's another one that's been pretty largely influential. I read a lot of his books like when I was in college, right? Or coming out of college and going into law school. So that sort of pivotal time, I filled a lot of it with a lot of that information. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I like his books. Like you said, the spin and the connection between the human element and the economic side of it. Yeah, it's interesting. So, all right, man, that's it. We did it. I'm going to link everything to your contacts in the show notes so people can reach out to you. Definitely reach out to Adnan. Yeah. Wealth of information, obviously, as you can tell from the conversation just now. But yeah, I'm looking forward to doing some work with you and some business with you. So yeah, thanks for jumping on.
Likewise. Absolutely. Yeah. And if you've got any questions in the meantime, I'm always more than happy to chat.
All right. Sounds good. Agents building cash flow. Go make some money. Let's go.
Surprisingly, most of the agents we speak with got into real estate hoping to gain passive income and become work optional. However, only 1 in 5 ever start investing. Most are simply too afraid to start. Once you get educated by listening to this show, you'll be able to overcome that fear and become the 1 in 5 who are finding financial freedom. Don't miss a single episode. If you want to stay up to date, the best way is to make sure you're subscribed. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do it now. And we'll catch you on the next episode.